The wind screamed over the white plains, carrying sharp ice crystals that bit into the skin like tiny blades. Snow swirled in the air, falling so thick that the horizon had vanished. The night had come early on this frozen planet, and the temperature had already dropped far below what most living things could bear. A lone figure stumbled through the storm. She was tall, her long coat flapping around her legs, her boots sinking deep into the snow with every step. Her skin, a faint pale blue, shimmered under the weak light of the moons. Two narrow ridges ran along her cheeks, a mark of her alien race. Her dark hair was stuck to her face, wet from melting snow. Her lips were trembling, her breath coming out in ragged clouds. Her name was Sariel. She hated humans. It was not a small dislike. Not a mild irritation. It was a deep wound in her heart that had been carved during the long war between her people and theirs. To her, humans were loud, selfish, greedy creatures who destroyed what they touched. She had sworn to never speak to one again, much less accept help from them. But tonight, the freezing wind didn't care about her oaths. Her own camp had been destroyed hours earlier. The small heating unit in her shelter had failed, and her emergency power cells had been stolen by scavengers. She had tried to keep warm by wrapping herself in blankets, but the cold had seeped into her bones. Staying would have meant death before dawn. She had heard of a small human outpost in this sector. It's just one cabin, occupied by a single man. It was her only chance, and she hated herself for walking toward it. The snow made it hard to see, but at last, through the white blur, she spotted a faint orange light flickering in the distance. It came from a window, square and dim, but to her, it was as bright as a star. She forced her legs to move faster, though each step felt heavier than the last. Her fingers had gone numb. Her jaw was locked so tight that her teeth ached. When she reached the wooden door of the cabin, she hesitated. She stood there, swaying in the wind, her heart hammering. What would he do when he saw her? Humans didn't often show kindness to her kind. Many still saw her people as enemies. She raised a hand to knock, but her knuckles barely tapped the surface before the door opened. A tall man stood in the doorway, his face partly hidden by the shadows inside. His eyes, sharp and watchful, scanned her quickly. He had short brown hair and a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore a thick sweater and heavy boots, and behind him she could see the faint glow of a heater. Warm air drifted past him and brushed against her frozen skin like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled between them, carrying the sharp scent of snow and pine. "What do you want?" His voice was steady, but not unfriendly. Sariel straightened her back, trying to hide her shaking. "Nothing from you," she said coldly. Her words were cut short when a violent gust nearly pushed her off balance. He reached out instinctively, grabbing her arm to steady her. His hand was warm, far too warm. She yanked herself free as if burned. "You'll freeze out there," he said. "I'll manage," she replied, but her voice was weaker than she wanted. He looked at her for another moment, then stepped aside. "If you stay out there, you won't see morning." The light from inside spilled over the snow at her feet, a thin golden path. She stared at it like it was a trap. Every part of her wanted to turn away, to walk back into the storm, to keep her pride intact. But her knees felt like water, her body heavy with cold. She took one small step forward. The warmth wrapped around her instantly. Her skin prickled as the frozen air on her body met the heat of the cabin. She closed the door behind her, shutting out the roar of the wind. The sudden silence made her ears ring. The inside of the cabin was small, just one room with a table, a stove, and a bed. Pushed up against the wall, a faint smell of wood smoke lingered in the air. She saw a kettle steaming gently on the stove, and the heater in the corner gave off a soft red glow. He studied her for a moment, his brow furrowed. "You're far from your kind's territory." Didn't answer. She removed her snow-crusted gloves, her pale blue fingers stiff and slow. She sat down on a small wooden chair, keeping her eyes on the floor. He didn't press her for answers. Instead, he poured a cup of hot water from the kettle and placed it on the table in front of her. "Drink, you're shivering." She almost refused out of habit, but her hands moved on their own, wrapping around the cup. The heat seeped into her fingers, sending a dull ache through them as feeling returned. She hated that she needed it, hated that it came from him. Outside, the storm raged on, shaking the walls. Inside, the silence between them was just as fierce. She thought she could still leave if she wanted to. She could step back into the snow and keep walking until she found some other shelter. Or until the cold claimed her. But something in the way he watched her, not with pity but with quiet steadiness, made her stay. She sipped the hot water slowly. The warmth spreading through her chest. The night was far from over, and she had no idea how much colder it was going to get. The wind battered the cabin walls like a giant fist, making the wooden beams creak. Inside, the air was warmer than the icy world outside, but it was still cold enough that Serial could see her breath in the dim light. The heater in the corner glowed weakly, its fan making a soft rattling sound. She sat at the table, both hands wrapped tightly around the cup of hot water he had given her. The warmth seeped into her palms, but the rest of her body still ached from the freezing night. Air. Her shoulders were tense, her legs stiff, her heart was still beating faster than it should. The human man, she didn't even know his name, moved across the small space. Checking the heater's settings, his movements were quick but careful, like someone used to fixing things under pressure. She noticed that he kept glancing toward her, not with fear exactly, but with the watchfulness of someone who wasn't sure what she might do. "How long have you been out there?" he asked without looking up. "Long enough," she replied shortly. He didn't push for more. Instead, he crouched down by the heater, frowning at the faint orange light. He muttered something under his breath, tapping the metal side. The rattling noise grew louder for a moment, then the heater gave a sharp click and went silent. The light went out completely. Sariel's fingers tightened around the cup. "What just happened?" "Instead," he said, standing up. "The storm must have damaged the fuel line. I can't fix it tonight." The warmth in the room was already beginning to fade. She could feel the cold seeping back in, creeping over her skin like invisible frost. Her stomach tightened. She knew what that meant. The temperature would drop fast, and without heat, survival until morning would be difficult. He walked over to the bed in the corner. It was small, barely big enough for one person, covered with 2 thick blankets and a fur-lined cover. He patted it once, then turned back to her. "If we're going to make it through the night, we'll have to share," he said. Serial stared at him. "Share what?" "The bed," he said plainly. "It's the only way. It's the only way." Her chest tightened with anger. "I would rather freeze than touch a human," shrugged, picking up one of the blankets and folding it over his arm. "Your choice. But if you stay out here, you'll be too cold to move by dawn, and I'm not carrying you." Her pride screamed at her to refuse. She wanted to tell him she didn't need him, that she could endure the cold. But the truth was, her fingers were already stiff again, and her lips had gone numb. The storm outside had no mercy. It would kill them both if they didn't fight it. He set the blanket down and began taking off his boots. The sound of the leather creaking filled the silence. Serial stayed in her chair, unmoving, but her mind was racing. She could leave now, walk back into the storm, but she knew how that would end. The wind howled, rattling the window. Finally, she stood up, her chair scraping the wooden floor. She walked to the bed with stiff steps, each one heavy with reluctance. He pulled back the blankets without a word, leaving enough space for her to climb in. The bed smelled faintly of wood smoke, and something she couldn't name, a scent that was warm, steady, and human. She hesitated, looking down at it like it might bite her. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. She didn't answer. She slipped under the blankets, keeping herself as far from him as the small bed allowed. She turned her back to him, pulling the cover up to her chin. The heat from his body was there, faint but real, and despite her will, she felt herself leaning toward it without moving. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The storm outside roared, and the cabin walls groaned under the force of the wind. He shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around both of them. His arm brushed against her back and she froze, but he didn't push closer. He was careful. Almost too careful, as if he knew how much she hated being here. "You're shivering," he said after a while. "It's the cold," she replied sharply. "No," he said softly, "it's fear." She turned her head slightly. She didn't look at him. "Fear of what?" "You." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe fear of finding out I'm not what you think." His words hung in the air like the steam from their breath. She didn't respond, but deep inside, she knew they had struck something, a thought she didn't want to examine. Minutes passed, cold pressing in from all sides. She could feel her body beginning to relax against her will, the shared warmth drawing her closer.
Right.
Her back brushed his arm again, and this time she didn't pull away. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in silence. Inside, the cabin was still, except for the sound of their breathing. The night was long, and she knew this was only the beginning. The storm outside had no mercy. The wind's cry rattled the walls as if it wanted to tear the cabin apart. Snow slapped against the windows in heavy bursts, blurring the glass into white shadows. Inside, the air had grown colder, biting through. The blankets. Sariel's toes were numb again. She kept her back to the human, her body tense. She could hear his steady breathing behind her, feel the faint heat radiating from his body, yet she refused to turn toward him. Pride was a stubborn fire in her chest, even when the cold tried to snuff it out. But the cold was winning. Her shoulders trembled despite her effort to stay still. The blanket felt too thin now. Her tailbone ached from the chill seeping through the mattress. Each breath came out as a mist in the dim light, a visible reminder that the temperature had dropped even more. Then his voice came, low but firm. "If we don't get closer, we won't make it to morning." She frowned at the wall in front of her. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he said. "You're shaking." Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "I'd rather shake than touch a human." He let out a slow breath, the sound carrying both patience and warning. "This isn't about touching. This is survival. I don't need your help." "Yes, you do," he replied simply. "And if you keep lying to yourself, you're going to die here." She turned her head slightly, glaring at him over her shoulder. "You think I'm weak?" "No," he said, holding her gaze. "I think you're proud, but pride won't keep you warm. Pride won't stop your heart from slowing in the cold." The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, she didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, only broken by the storm. Outside, he shifted, propping himself up on one elbow. "Here's the truth. The heater is gone, the fuel's gone, and the storm will last all night. The only thing keeping us alive is shared heat. If you can't accept that, you're free to step outside." Her chest tightened. He wasn't bluffing. She could hear it in his voice. This was an ultimatum. Stay in the bed with him and live, or walk out into the snow and let the storm claim her. She thought about her people, about the promises she had made to never let a human's hand be her lifeline. But promises meant nothing if she was frozen and buried by morning. The wind gave a loud, haunting wail, almost as if the planet itself was warning her. Her pride bent, but it didn't break, not completely. She turned slowly and faced him. Her eyes glimmered in the half-light, sharp yet uncertain. "Fine," she said quietly, "but you keep your hands where I can see them." A faint smirk tugged at his lips. "I'm not interested in anything but keeping you alive." "Good," she said, though she didn't entirely believe herself. He lay back down, pulling the blanket higher. "Move closer."
Ow.
"You need to be against my chest. That's how we share heat most effectively." Her jaw tightened, but she inched toward him, the mattress dipping with each small shift. When her body finally touched his, she felt an instant difference. The cold on her side melted under the steady warmth of his body. Her skin prickled as blood began to flow more freely again. His arm came around her, not pulling, not squeezing, just resting lightly across her back to hold the heat between them. She kept her hands against his chest. feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. It was strange. She had imagined a human's heartbeat would be harsh, hurried, impatient. Instead, it was calm, almost grounding. Better, he asked. Warmer, she admitted reluctantly, then stopped fighting it. She gave a soft, bitter laugh. I've been fighting humans my whole life. Can't expect me to stop in one night. I'm not asking you to stop, he said. I'm asking you to survive, that's all. His voice was so matter-of-fact that she didn't know how to answer. She closed her eyes, letting the heat seep into her bones. The sound of the storm outside became a dull roar instead of a sharp one. Her breathing slowed, matching his without meaning to. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against her palms. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. She didn't move away, couldn't move away because every time she thought about it, cold reached in and stole a little more from her. At some point, she realized her forehead was resting against his collarbone. She should have been furious at herself. She should have felt disgusted. But instead, she felt safe. And that was even more dangerous than the cold. She opened her eyes just enough to look at him. His eyes were closed, but his expression wasn't guarded or wary like before. He looked human in a way she hadn't allowed herself to notice. Her pride whispered warnings, telling her not to let this night change anything, but deep inside. Another voice, one she didn't want to hear, was telling her it already had. The cabin had gone quiet, but it was not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the heavy, tense silence that sits between two people who do not trust each other. The storm outside was still fierce, but now its roar felt distant compared to the closeness. Inside the bed, Sariel lay facing the wall, her eyes open in the dark. She could feel the slow warmth spreading through her, seeping into the parts of her body the cold had claimed earlier. The human's arm was still draped loosely across her back. Not pressing, not forcing, just there. Like a steady barrier between her and the freezing air. She hated how much it helped. Her mind told her to keep space. But the small bed left. Little room. Every time she moved even an inch away, the cold rushed in like a thief. Herb. Her body betrayed her, shifting back toward the heat without her permission. Behind her, she could feel him breathing slow, even calm. The rise and fall of his chest was steady against her shoulder blades. She tried to focus on the sound of the wind instead, but the rhythm of his breathing was louder in her ears. She didn't want this. She didn't want to know what it felt. Like to lie this close to someone she had been taught to hate. The blanket was pulled tight around them, sealing in the heat. She shifted slightly, trying to make more space, but her movement caused her to bump against him. His chest pressed more firmly into her back for a second, his arm tightening just a little. You're still cold, he said quietly. She froze. I'm fine. No, you're not. Your shoulders are stiff. She turned her head slightly, but kept her eyes away from his. You notice too much. It's hard not to notice when we're sharing the same air, he replied, his tone even. The words made her aware of just how close they really were. She could feel the faint vibration of his voice through his chest. Her breath came out in a shallow puff, brushing against the edge of the blanket. Another long moment passed before she asked, Do you do this often? Invite strangers into your bed. It's only the ones who will die if I don't, he said. Her jaw clenched. She wanted to see arrogance in his answer, but there was none. It was matter of fact, without pride or mockery. That made it harder to hold on to her anger. The cold tightened its grip on her legs, and without thinking she pulled her knees up slightly, curling toward the warmth. The movement made her back press more firmly against him.
Out.
The heat of his body seeped deeper into her skin. Her mind screamed at her to move away, but she stayed where she was, he said after a pause. This would work better if you faced me. She stiffened. Not going to happen. Your choice, he said, though she could hear the hint of a smile in his voice. But you're losing heat from your front, and that's not smart. I'll manage, she replied quickly, but the truth was, she wasn't sure she would. The chill in her chest was slow but persistent, and she knew he was right. Still, turning to face him would mean meeting his eyes, seeing him up close in the dark, feeling his breath on her skin. She lay there, silently arguing with herself, until Another cold draft slid through the edge of the blanket. Her teeth chattered before she could stop them. Without warning, he shifted behind her. One arm slid beneath her neck, pulling her gently but firmly until she rolled halfway toward him. She gasped in surprise, her hands pressing against his chest. "What are you doing?" "Keeping you alive," he said simply. Now, they were face to face, only inches apart. She could see the faint outlines of his features in the dim light, the strong line of his jaw, the faint stubble, the steady eyes that didn't waver even under her glare. His breath was warm against her cheek. The heat between them grew quickly, wrapping around her like another blanket. Chest warmed, the ache in her fingers faded. It worked, and that infuriated her. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice low. "No," she said instantly, though her body told a different story. He didn't push further. Instead, he adjusted the blanket to cover them completely. His arms stayed around her, not tight, but unyielding. She told herself she would only stay like this, until the shivering stopped. Just until her body was warm again. But as the minutes passed, she found her eyes slipping closed. The sound of the storm fading behind the steady rhythm of his breathing. Somewhere deep inside, a small crack had formed in the wall she had built around herself. She didn't want to admit it, not now, not ever. But she knew it was there, and the warmth in the bed wasn't just from the heat anymore. The storm still raged outside, but inside the bed, the world had narrowed to shared warmth and the sound of breathing. Surreal had stopped shivering. Her body had relaxed against her will, melting into the heat that pressed gently around her. She opened her eyes in the dim light, seeing him more clearly now. His face was calm, his eyes half closed, as if the cold didn't bother him as much. There were faint lines near his eyes, not from age, but from a life spent watching and waiting. She found herself studying the small details, the scar along his jaw, the roughness of his hands resting lightly against her back. It bothered her that she noticed these things. She told herself she was only being cautious, observing him the way a soldier watches an enemy. But her mind was slower to believe. "The lie, you're staring," he said quietly, without opening his eyes. Her pulse jumped. "I am not." A faint smile curved his lips. "It's fine." "I've been staring too." She frowned. "Why?" "Because I've never been this close to one of your kind without a weapon between us," he said. The words should have been sharp, but his tone wasn't mocking. It was just truth. She couldn't think of a reply. Minutes passed. The wind outside roared, shaking the walls, but it no longer sounded so threatening. The warmth between them was steady now, almost comfortable. Almost. He shifted slightly, and she felt the brush of his fingers against her arm. It wasn't deliberate, more like an accident, but she didn't move away. "Do you hate all humans?" he asked, "or just the ones from the war?" Her voice was cold. "All of them. Even me." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Yes," he nodded slowly, as if that answer didn't surprise him at all. "Fair enough.
Oh.
But I don't hate you." Her brows drew. "Together, why not?" "Because hate takes too much energy," he said simply. "And out here, I'd rather save my strength for staying alive." It wasn't the answer she expected. She didn't know why, but it stayed in her head. Turning over and over like a stone in water, the cold crept in again, just enough to make her curl closer to him. Shh. She told herself it was only for warmth, but she felt his breath on the top of her head and knew it wasn't entirely true. Her eyes drifted down to his chest. The steady beat of his heart was strong under her hand. She didn't know why she noticed the rhythm. But it felt different from her people's, slower, heavier, like it had carried more weight than it should. "You smell different," she said suddenly. His brow rose slightly. "Different from what?" "From the others I've met," she said, her voice quieter now. "Not of smoke and iron. You smell. It's like pine, and something else I can't name." He chuckled softly. "That's probably just the soap I use." She shook her head, her ridged cheek brushing against his chest. "No, it's not soap. It's something alive." There was a silence between them after that, not tense, but heavy with something unspoken. Her mind told her to stop talking. To rebuild the wall, she had started to lower without realizing it. But the storm outside had stripped away so much already, and maybe a little of her pride had gone with it. She surprised herself with the next question. "What's your name?" "Kale," he said in Sariel. "Nice to meet you, Sariel," he said, as if they weren't lying in a bed to keep from freezing to death. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but the sound caught in her throat. She remembered the first time she had heard a human voice say her name without anger and realized this was it. The warmth between them grew heavier, thicker, almost like it had nothing to do with the cold anymore. Her fingers brushed against his chest, and this time she didn't pull away. Kale noticed. His eyes met hers for a brief moment in the dim light, and she felt something flicker their curiosity. "Maybe you're understanding." The storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm had started to form. And for the first time that night, Sariel wondered if surviving until morning was the only thing she truly wanted. The storm was weaker now, but it still whispered around the cabin like a restless ghost. The howling wind had faded into low moans, the snow against the walls softer than before. Morning was trying to push its way into the night, yet the cabin remained dim, lit only by the faint gray light seeping through the frost-covered window. Sariel woke slowly, body stiff at first. Then she realized she wasn't shivering. She was still pressed against Kale, her head resting just below his shoulder, his arm loosely around her back. The blankets were warm, and their shared heat had done more than just keep her alive. It had left her feeling safe. She hated the thought. Safety wasn't something she trusted, not when it came from a human. Her first instinct was to pull away, to put space between them before he noticed she'd stayed so close for so long. But when she shifted, his arm tightened slightly, not forcefully, just enough to keep her from moving away. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. She froze. "The storm's almost gone," she murmured, avoiding his eyes. He nodded. "You'll be able to travel soon." The words hit her like cold water. Travel, that meant leaving. She told herself that was what she wanted all along. That was the plan. She had no reason to stay in this cabin, no reason to see him again. And yet, the idea of stepping back into the snow without him felt heavier than she expected. Kale pulled the blanket from his shoulder and sat up. The sudden loss of his warmth made the air feel sharper, and she instantly missed it. He crossed the small room to check the stove, adding another piece of wood. The fire crackled weakly, filling the air with the faint scent of smoke. "You should eat something before you go," he said without looking at her. "I didn't say I was leaving now," she replied. He glanced over his shoulder, one brow raised. "You planning to stay?" She hesitated before answering. "Just until the snow melts." His mouth twitched like he was hiding a smile. "Fair enough." For a moment, silence returned, but it was different from the silence of the night before. Less sharp, less hostile. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The bed was still warm where he had been lying. She found herself staring at the empty space longer than she meant to. "You don't talk much," he said, breaking her thoughts. "I talk when I need to," she replied. He poured her a cup of water from the kettle, placing it on the table. "Then tell me something. Why did you really come here?" "I don't believe it was just the storm." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I wanted to see you?" "Think you needed to," he said. Calmly, the words stirred something in her chest. Annoyance, maybe, or something dangerously close to understanding. She took a sip of the warm water, keeping her gaze fixed on the table. "You think you understand me?" she said slowly. "No," Kale replied, leaning back in his chair. "But I understand cold. I understand what it's like to survive." "Besides someone you thought was your enemy?" Her hands tightened on the cup. He was right, but she didn't want him to be. The wind outside gave one last long sigh, and then the world seemed still. A beam of pale morning light slipped through a crack in the clouds, spilling faintly through the frost-coated window. Storm had truly broken. Kale stood and moved to the door, pulling it open just enough to look outside. A rush of frigid air entered, but it was no longer biting. It was the sharp cold of a clear winter day. "It's over," he said quietly. Sariel rose and joined him, standing a step behind. The snow outside stretched in endless white fields, glittering under the weak sun. The world looked untouched, as if the storm had erased all signs of struggle. "It's strange," she said. "What is?" "That something so violent can leave everything looking calm." He gave a small nod. "Storms do that. They strip away the noise. All that's left is what survived." She looked at him then, really looked, and realized they were both survivors of more than just one night. Her pride told her to turn away, to step out into the snow and vanish before this strange connection grew any stronger. But another part of her, quieter and harder to ignore, whispered that maybe the storm had broken something else too. The wall between them. Cale closed the door and returned to the table. "You can stay until you're ready," he said, his voice casual. Sariel hesitated, then nodded once. "I will." And though she didn't say it aloud, she knew the reason had nothing to do with waiting for the snow to melt. The morning light crept slowly across the cabin floor, turning the frost on the window into tiny shards of gold. Outside, the snow glittered in the pale sun, stretching in every direction like an endless frozen sea. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered in the quiet. Sariel stood near the door, wrapped in one of Cale's heavy blankets. She had been staring at the open white world for a long time, but her thoughts were not on the snow. They were tangled somewhere between last night's closeness and the silence of this morning. Cale was at the small stove, frying something in a dented pan. The smell drifted through the room, warm, savory, comforting. It was a simple scent, yet it made the cabin feel less like a shelter for strangers and more like something else. "You should eat," he said without turning. She didn't move from the door. "And then? It's up to you," he replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You expect me to leave? Expect you to do whatever you think is right," he said, finally glancing at her. "But I won't stop you if you walk out that door." The words were plain, but they struck something deep in her. She had been prepared for an order, a demand, even an insult, but not this quiet freedom. She walked slowly to the table and sat down. He set a plate in front of her, steam curling upward. She picked up the fork, turning it in her fingers before taking a bite. The warmth spread through her chest, different from the body heat they had shared in the night, but somehow just as grounding. "This isn't the first time you've saved someone, is it?" she asked between bites. "No," he said simply. "Why?" Cale shrugged. "Because I can, and because it's better than watching someone die when I could have done something." She studied him carefully. In his face, she didn't see the arrogance she had always imagined humans carried. She saw a quiet stubbornness, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be strong. The meal passed in silence. When she finished, she set the fork down and looked at the empty plate. Something about it felt final, as if it marked the end of their shared night and the start of something uncertain. Cale stood, collecting the dishes. "I'll walk you to the edge of the ridge. From there you should be able to reach your people." Her chest tightened. The logical part of her said this was the smart choice, but another part, the part that had woken with her forehead against his shoulder, didn't want to go. "You assume I want to go back," she said. He stopped halfway to the sink, looking at her with steady eyes. "You don't?" I don't." "No," she admitted, the words heavier than she expected. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint pop of wood in the stove. Finally, Cale spoke, his voice low. "You can stay if you want. I'm not asking for anything in return." She searched his face for any sign of a trap, but found none. "Why would you want me here?" "'Cause last night proved we're better off together than freezing alone," he said simply. "And maybe because I don't hate the idea of you being here." Her lips pressed into a thin line, as if she were holding back words she didn't want to say. Cale turned back to the stove, busying himself with the dishes. Sariel stood slowly, letting the blanket slip from her shoulders. The air bit at her skin, but it wasn't the sharp pain of the night before. It was a reminder that she could handle it now. She crossed the small room and stopped behind him. "If I stay," she said softly, "I keep my own space." "Agreed." "And You keep your hands where I can see them. He gave a faint smile, also agreed. Her eyes softened, though she quickly looked away. Then, maybe I'll stay until the snow melts. They both knew the snow on this planet could take weeks to fade. Cale nodded once. Then it settled. The tension in the room shifted, not gone, but no longer sharp. Sariel returned to the table, watching as Cale moved around the cabin. She realized that for the first time since she had left her ruined camp, the idea of tomorrow didn't feel like a threat. Outside, the frozen world glittered under the pale sun. Inside, the warmth between them was no longer just for survival. And, though neither spoke it aloud, both knew the truth. The storm had forced them into one bed. But something else entirely would keep them in the same cabin.